Wouldn't it be easier if I just had my own core values and my wife had her own core values and we kind of just support each other in doing that and call it a day?
Well,
Because it sounds like it's a lot of work.
a lot of work. Yeah, a lot of work. But I don't know if it's easier.
All right, well, let's get into it. So it's a lot of work to try to figure out how to take what's important to me and what's important to my wife
Right.
and try to find the places where those things naturally
Overlap.
connect and overlap, and then come to agreement on what those main things are that we're going to do together.
Yeah.
We've talked about it in the first two episodes, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. It is work to get there, right?
Absolutely, it's work.
Why wouldn't it just be okay? Why wouldn't it be easier? Why wouldn't we have fewer arguments if we just had our own individual core values and our own resources and left our own devices?
Do you want to be roommates or do you want to be a team?
Well, that's an interesting question. Do you think couples, today we've talked a lot about the idea that couples don't naturally share financial resources like they used to.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a tendency in couples today that is different in the past about combining together?
That'd be an interesting question to get data on. I don't know of the data, but my intuition, just based on experience of 30 years of experience working with couples, is yes, it's different now. Just with more couples living together, not being married, for all kinds of reasons, that's a phenomenon that's happening now.
Right.
I think it does mean that a lot of those couples are not combining their dollars.
Another phenomenon that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years is equality in pay and equality in work efforts in the home. So where we used to have more often a sole provider that was often the husband who was bringing home most of the money, and in the old days, if the wife worked, it was a supporting paycheck. That was the norm. And now we're in a situation where it's not uncommon for the wife to make more money than the husband, or very similar. And so everybody has their own resources. Hey, I got my own money.
Yeah.
And so there's a tendency to believe we can kind of both go it alone and do it together. And I think that really creates a problem. And I think it really creates an opportunity for couples to think through, who do they want to be? And so that's what we really want to talk about today, is to answer the question of, are there advantages to combining? So I want to use an analogy that I think is a little bit helpful, and that's the game Tug of War. Did you play Tug of War when you were a kid?
Oh, for sure.
I love Tug of War. And I love watching it today when they put together, these big competitive teams and they're all going at it. And I'm wondering if while you were playing Tug of War, did you ever wonder if your teammates were pulling as hard as you were?
Oh, yes. I thought I was pulling the hardest, and why weren't the other people pulling as hard as me?
Did anything ever happen to your effort level as you took your eye off of the flag and started looking around to see who was doing what? And there's one thing that's worse than just looking around, and that's starting to communicate with your team about who's pulling harder than who else.
Right.
And so I think the idea is that we really, if we're going to be successful in gaining the benefit of both of our efforts, there needs to be a condition, a set of circumstances, an organizational idea.
Rules of thumb.
Rules of thumb, that we are trying to move this rope together in this direction. And we're more interested in moving the rope than we are as to what the other person is doing, because we have trust and faith that the other person is also fully committed to that rope.
Well, and also you want to cooperate, right? You don't want to be competing with each other. That doesn't make sense.
Especially in today where jobs can move across the country or across the county. What do you do when one of you decides that based on a promotion that you want to go somewhere? Those are big moments in a marriage that is not built around core values. How do you use resources when the salaries aren't equal? How do you use resources? Do you just say, well, I make 60% of the money and you make 40% of the money, so you can pursue 40% of your goals and I can
Right.
pursue 60% of my goals?
Right.
How does that work out in
Not
counseling
so well.
sessions?
I know people who try that, and it doesn't work so well.
So I want to ask you, just from a counseling standpoint, can you see a significant difference? And I know it's going to be somewhat anecdotal,
Yeah.
but can you see a difference in couples that are trying to combine or couples that are trying to stay separate?
Obviously, it's, as you mentioned, anecdotal. Some people figure out ways to make it work when they don't combine. But as a rule of thumb, when they are cooperating together and they've talked through all the issues comprehensively, and they know what they want to be doing together, they tend to feel as if those shared values, right, the things they have in common that they said, this is really what we want to work on. We want to save for a new house, or we, whatever it is. They tend to feel more aligned. They tend to have less conflict about money.
Would you say that, I mean, we always have made jokes about how opposites attract. And I think in a previous episode, we kind of dismantled that a little bit because it's pretty normal to see the differences.
Sure.
Seeing the similarities is kind of cliche.
Yeah. But important.
But important. Relationships that benefit from the skills that the other person has. There's some things that I do pretty well, and there's some things that I do not so well. And I find more often than not, because I married somebody who's slightly different than me, she's able to accomplish those things that I can't at a much higher level than I can.
Yeah.
So she makes me look good, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I have the opportunity to make her look good. So when we actually both grab the rope, a really strange synergy happens, which is we are not just the two of us, we are better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think part of what we're talking about here is this idea that core values is really defining what is our rope. And it's really asking the question, is this a rope that we could both agree to put our hands on and pull? And would pulling this rope be a great way to spend our life? And so, is it important to find your shared core values?
Yes, of course.
So it's the idea of, are we going to work together to a destination, or are we going to
Work independently?
work against each other, work in different directions? This may sound like relationship 101. You may already be married and it sounds like we're talking about relationship 101. Do you think this is a good use of our time?
I do. It's funny. It does. I know. I'm sure when people hear it, they'll think, oh, yeah, maybe this is something I already knew. And in that sense, it's relationship 101. But isn't it a funny thing, too? Like, sometimes you know something, like deep in your bones you know it, but then when someone says it, you realize you haven't been doing it? Or you haven't been living it in some way? So sometimes coming back to the fundamentals is important.
So today's exercise, if you will, or concept about core values, is really just a recommitment, or an opportunity to ask the question, do we want to build a life together? Do we want to use our shared resources to accomplish something that we can't accomplish individually, but we could accomplish together? Do we want to set a course that draws us continually closer together, or do we want to set courses that may eventually pull us further apart? So stay with us as we go on to the next phase.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll be able to get content just like this to you.
Hey, and if you want to, go to relational-media.com, and there you'll find that Jeff and I put on a class called More Than a Budget, and we go over this idea of how to create core values, or how to find your core values, how to get them all tightened up together, how to align your finances with them, and build the life that you want together.
And as always, stay curious.
Yes.